When Mr. Barroso came into the studio a few weeks ago, I was quite surprised by how incredibly steely and sure he was that Scotland would not be able to re-enter the EU. He was absolutely adamant in private and in public on the sofa that it would not happen. And he said he was speaking for many other big European heads. I wonder why you just regard this as yet more unionist bluster. He's got no particular dog in this fight.
Oh, well, I think perhaps he has, but let's come to that in a second. And of course, Mr. Barroso's comments since have been attacked by former Director Generals of the European Union, former Secretary Generals, people on the Court of Justice like Sir David Edwards, for example, and he's actually united opinion against.
Yeah, if I may say so.
Well, yes, indeed, and President Barroso.
Go ahead.
Sorry, well, Mr. President Barroso will soon be a former person as well, but I was quite interested in the remarks in the French National Assembly and indeed in the French Senate this week, where French senators were pointing out that they believed that President Barroso was being influenced by his potential future candidacy for Secretary General of NATO and was sucking up to London in order to advance that process. Now, I've got no idea if that's the case, but what I do know is that serious people, Secretary Generals, former presidents or former courts, former judges in the Court of Justice like David Edwards, have pointed out why you cannot exclude from the European Union citizens in Scotland who've been part of it for over 40 years, and why it would be totally ridiculous for the European Union not to accept the democratic wishes of the Scottish people. Again, of course, it comes back to this question of the process that we're having in Scotland, a consensual referendum agreed by both parties. And that means, of course, not just that Scots have the right to express their opinion, but there's an obligation on others, including in London, and indeed President Barroso, to accept the verdict of the Scottish people. Otherwise, the whole argument that's being placed about the superiority of this process compared to what's going on in Crimea dissolves in a puff of dust.
I think it'll be quite hard to get back in, I have to say. But let's move on to the other big question we've had this week, Theresa May,
but
saying that
Sorry, wait a minute. Can I just
yes,
examine that for a second, Andrew? This is what the Andrew Marr analysis, as opposed to Sir David Edwards,
having talked to Mr. Barroso, which I think you haven't.
Commission, as opposed, as opposed, Andrew, to the weight of evidence that's being presented to the Scottish Parliament's committees at the present moment. I don't know, is that an individual expression, or is that the expression of the BBC?
I've got no views on this, nor does the BBC. I've got no views on this, nor does the BBC. I was simply reflecting what Mr. Barroso
said what your opinion was.
I said I think it'll be quite difficult, having talked to Mr. Barroso, who is, after all, the president. I mean, he may be a former person.
I see.
We will all be former people. You will be a former person. I'll be a former. But he is currently the president of the European Commission, which is not a small job.
Andrew, I thought you were asking questions. But anyway, look, I mistook you there. I thought you were giving your opinion as opposed to President Barroso's opinion. If we're still giving President Barroso's opinion, then I've put the weight of other opinion of people who say, look, people who are citizens of the European Union, have been so for 40 years, have acquired certain rights. And of course, the democratic imperative of people in Scotland, in London, even low unto Brussels, to accept the democratic verdict to the Scottish people, which is clearly in the best interest not just of Scotland, but of the wider continent of Europe, would strike me as providing an imperative even more important than the individual views of President Barroso, or for that matter, any views that may or may not be held in the BBC.
Or may not be held.